Hey guys, I am Dani. Welcome back to Summer Skye Gardens. So in today's video, I wanted to talk about roses, and you can see here behind me my rose garden that I created this past year. I've been growing roses for several years now, but last year I wanted to really expand it. So I created this area in my backyard that has 13 different types of roses, and I also have some up front. So it is late August. We are getting into fall, and if you live here in the South like I do, where we have long hot summers and kind of more moderate winters, the fall and winter is actually a great time to plant new roses. We get the occasional freeze. We don't get any snow. Roses can definitely handle those temperatures. They like them, and the earlier you get them in the ground and get them planted before the long hot summer is really best. Now, if you live more north where you have a little bit colder and harsher winter, then you're going to want to wait until late winter, very early spring to get yours in the ground. So this video is going to be more for the beginning rose gardener, just some very easy, quick tips about how to get things going, how to choose your rose, how to plant it, how to take care of it, and how to harvest your roses. And the first tip that I want to give you is don't be overwhelmed by all of the information about roses. I mean, there are so many types of roses, so many varieties, and it can get a little confusing or overwhelming trying to figure out which ones you want to grow. So I encourage you to do some research, but I'm going to take you through just some very basic things that you want to think about. All right, the rain is kind of coming and going, which is great. We haven't had any rain hardly like all summer, and now it's hurricane season. So of course, lots of rain and storms, but let me see, I think it might have died down, and I will take you guys closer to my garden and just kind of show you around my setup before we talk about the basics. All right, here we are a little bit closer. It's kind of still raining a little bit, so I'm going to talk fast, but then I will go inside and give you some more information. But you can see here, this big kind of raised bed area around my magnolia tree is where I planted all the roses. So they are planted in the ground. I have pretty heavy clay soil, which roses actually don't mind too much, but when I went to plant them, I dug a hole about 2 feet deep, put in some fresh soil, a lot of compost, and got them in the ground. And then probably the biggest thing that has been helpful is I set up a drip irrigation system. You have to be careful with watering roses, especially where we live and it gets humid. They can develop fungal disease like black spot. So you definitely want to water them at the base. And if you do drip irrigation, then you're getting right to the root system and you're not splashing all the leaves with water by overhead watering with a hose or a sprinkler. Let me kind of walk you around my setup and all my varieties. All right, so you can see here in the back I have six roses here, 6 roses here, and then a climbing rose on the end. So my climbing rose is planted along the fence, and I am just kind of interweaving the canes as they grow and using Velcro to hold them to the fence. One thing about roses, which are different from other vines, is that they don't have a way to attach themselves to the fence. So you need, because I only have vertical bars here, I'm just using the plant Velcro to help them hold on. You need some way to attach them to a fence or a trellis. But all of these roses were pretty little when I planted them last year, and they've put on a lot of new growth. And then you can see here my drip system. This one got out a little bit far, but usually it's a lot closer. I have some stepping stones in the middle. And then I have these copper labels by all the varieties so that I remember exactly which one's which. This is one of my favorites. This is Golden Celebration, which has just been blooming all summer, even in the heat. But it is starting to rain, so let's go inside. All right, so I came up here under the patio. It's raining outside, but instead of going in, it actually feels good out here for once. So let me keep chatting about roses. So number one, when you're trying to figure out what type of rose you want, I want you to think about kind of three general categories. Do you want like a climbing or rambling rose that you want to train on a fence or a trellis or an arbor or a gazebo? That's kind of one general category. Or do you want some type of like large shrub-like rose where you're actually going to cut the roses off and use them for arrangements? Or do you want more of like a landscaping, ground cover kind of rose that's really mostly for decoration? You're not gonna cut from it, you just want it to look pretty in your yard. Now, there's like, I think almost 30 or more actually specific types of roses, but in my opinion, this is the easiest way to think about them for the new rose gardener is in these three categories. And I actually have all three. I have one climbing rose, which I just showed you. It's a Peggy Martin, which is a great variety for beginners because it's very hardy, it blooms continuously, and it works great in the south. But I have one climbing rose. I have a ton of like shrub-like roses that I cut from. And then in my front landscaping, I actually have a ton of drift roses, which are really there for looks, for landscaping. They're very hardy, easy to take care of. I actually have a video that I made about drift roses. I will link it below. They're one of my favorite landscaping plants that you can add. So in this video, I'm not going to talk about drift roses or kind of ground cover roses. Go watch that video for information on that. We're mainly going to talk about shrub-like roses that you're going to cut from, and then a few notes on the climbing and rambling roses. Now, after you determine what general type of rose you want, start looking online at different varieties. So I think one thing people are drawn to is the look. So let's say I want a pink rose. So I'm going to start searching, you know, pink shrub-like roses, and you want to pay attention to which ones are good for your climate. So most websites that sell roses, they will specify what zones they are hardy in, and if they can handle a lot colder temperatures, and if they can, more importantly, can they handle heat? Some do fine in the heat and some do not. And you don't want to buy one where it says it's only hardy to zone 8. If you live in zone 9, it's probably not going to do well in the summer. So look up, you know, the type of rose you want, the color, the shape. You know, do you want something that smells really strongly or has a very light fragrance? There's just so many varieties you can look at. I will post down below this video all the varieties I have, which have all done really well here in the hot south. So if you're looking for one to grow, maybe go check out my list. Now, one note when choosing like a climbing or rambling rose, the difference between those is that rambling roses tend to get a lot bigger and longer, you could say. So if you have a smaller fence area, you probably want to choose one that's more climbing. But if you have like a gazebo or a huge arbor, you can choose a rambling rose. Just keep in mind that neither of them are going to be able to hold themselves to any kind of apparatus or trellis, so you're going to need a way to help hold them up. When you go look up those type of roses, the websites or, you know, wherever you buy them from, it should be able to tell you the approximate length that the rose will get up to. Some of them will grow up to between 30 and 50 feet, which is crazy. So just keep that in mind when you're choosing that kind of rose. Now, another thing to keep in mind when you're looking up the type of rose you're going to get, it may either say that it's grafted or its own root. So if it's grafted, they have taken that variety of rose and grafted it, attached it to a root system of a type of rose that's a lot more hardy and stronger. Which typically those grow fine, but you just need to keep in mind that if anything starts growing from below that grafting period, that's going to be not the variety that you want. So you want to keep that in mind when you're pruning. Now, own root roses, those are the whole plant system from the root up to the stems and the flowers is all the same variety. And either way you want to go is fine. Personally, I have bought only own root roses because I didn't want to have any issues with pruning. So that's just another tip to keep in mind. Okay, so let's say you've picked out your rose, you have it ordered, it's coming to your house. So you want to make sure that the spot that you're going to grow in is very fertile, it's very well draining. You're going to want to dig a hole, probably like a couple of feet deep, couple of feet wide, pretty big, because you have to think about that rose is going to get a lot bigger than what you're buying it at. I usually like to add some soil and a lot of compost. Roses are heavy feeders, so if you can start them off with a ton of compost and really fertile soil, they will thank you later. You get that little baby planted and then give it a super deep watering on planting. That's why in the winter for us in the South, it's a really good time to plant because we might have a lot of rain, and that's when you want to get those roses in the ground when there's a lot of rain. Like I said, if you're more in the north and you're going to do this in early spring, a lot of times that's more of your rainy season. But whether there's rain coming or not, make sure you give it a really deep watering. And then freshly planted roses, you're going to want to keep a close eye on them and water them maybe every couple of days while they're getting established. Once they're established, roses usually need watering only like once a week unless the temperatures are super hot. So like for instance, where I am in South Texas, we had a ridiculously hot summer and I was watering my roses every 3 to 4 days of very, very deep watering, and they were perfectly happy with that. All right, so you've got your rose planted, you're keeping up with the watering. Let's talk about fertilizing. So climbing and rambling roses, depending on how often they are blooming, usually climbing roses will bloom repetitively, but mainly spring and fall. Rambling roses typically bloom just once a year in the spring. So those type, you really only need to fertilize them right before they're going to bloom, so either once or twice a year. Now the bigger shrub-like roses, which should be giving you continuous blooms if they're new varieties, if they're old, they're going to bloom once. I don't know many people that buy those just because you want to have continuous blooms. But just remember, roses are heavy feeders, so my rule of thumb is that I try to give them some fresh compost about once a month, especially during the growing period between spring and fall. And then I will come in and also give them a quick release fish emulsion fertilizer every couple of weeks between spring and fall. I find this to work really well, and it's easy to kind of keep up with that mentality like, okay, every 2 to 4 weeks I'm coming in and feeding them. Now, at the end of fall, usually around October, early November, where I'm at, I don't fertilize them anymore. In the winter, you don't want them making blooms. You want them establishing a stronger root system. So if you're fixing to go plant these new roses in kind of the late fall or winter, don't fertilize them for a while. Wait until they start to wake up in the spring, usually around, March or so, and then start hitting them with some fertilizer. But if you can kind of keep up with that from spring to fall, then these roses should reward you with a lot more blooms. All right, and then a really quick tip on pruning. I'm not going to go into that in depth because I want to do a video on that in February when it comes time for me to prune my roses, so I can actually show you how I do it. But the climbing and rambling roses, you can kind of prune at any time, but the main time is after they have bloomed. So in the spring or the fall, try to catch them when they're not in bloom, and then that will prompt a new flush of blooms, which will be a lot hardier and a lot more productive the next time they're in bloom. The big shrub-like roses that you're cutting from, you usually want to prune those in late winter or early spring. So my rule of thumb in the South is Valentine's Day. I've pruned them anywhere between mid-January to mid-February, and they've been fine. But that pruning will really help them put on a beautiful spring flush of blooms. The rest of the year, you're not necessarily pruning, you're just coming in and deadheading, clipping off the dead flowers, clipping off any kind of dead or diseased foliage. But the pruning is really only that one time a year. Now, the last thing I'll talk about is cutting your roses, because most of us that are growing roses, you know, we're growing them so that we can cut them and bring them inside and have them fresh in our house. So a general tip is when you're going down the stem to cut your rose, try not to cut more than 1/3 of the plant. So look at kind of the general shape and height of your plant. Don't be cutting super deep, especially when your roses are little baby plants, because it's going to be hard for them to recover from that. My roses, I actually really didn't cut any kind of stems the first year. I let them put on a lot of new growth. And then this year I came in and I was kind of gently cutting them. Next year I'll be able to cut them a lot harder. You want to try to hit down to a set of 5 leaves, and then you can get a stripper and strip off like the leaves and the thorns if you want, or you can leave them on. It's kind of up to you. And then let me show you a picture of kind of different stages of when you want to cut your roses. When they're fully open, then typically the bees have already gotten to them and they're not going to last really long in a vase. So, you know, those are perfectly beautiful and fine if you have an event that day or something that you want them on full display kind of for just 1 to 2 days. Go ahead and cut those and use them, but they're not going to last very long. You want to catch the rose when it's still fairly closed, but the sepals, which are like the little leaves underneath the bud, are flopping open. If the sepals are up and that bud is still somewhat closed, it's not going to open anymore in the vase. So let the bud open slightly. The sepals are down, that rose should then kind of open up and expand in the vase, and you'll get several more days of vase life out of that rose. Another fun thing that you can do with roses is you can dry them. You can use silica gel to preserve their shape and use it for decorations, or you can dry the rose petals and make rose creams, facial creams, rose water to use on your skin, use it as potpourri. You can actually even eat rose petals as long as you're not putting any chemicals on them. So there's a lot of different uses for roses. I like to use mine in arrangements, and then when they're starting to wilt slightly, I will actually take all the petals off and save them, and I like to make rose oil for my skin. So there's a lot of different ways that you can utilize roses other than just for looks. All right, y'all, that's all I have for today. It's kind of just some basic information. Probably over the winter, definitely in the spring, I'll be doing some more videos on roses. I'll definitely be showing a lot of that on my Instagram. So be sure you're following me on Instagram at Summer Skye Gardens to see my posts and my stories. But thanks for tuning in, and I will catch you guys next time.